The golden apple. In the high and far off days when men were heroes and walked with the gods, Peleus, king of the Myrmidons, took for his wife a sea nymph called Thetis, Thetis of the silver feet. Many guests came to their wedding feast, and among the mortal guests came all the gods of high Olympus. But as they sat feasting, one who had not been invited was suddenly in their midst. Eris, the goddess of discord, had been left out because wherever she went, she took trouble with her. Yet here she was all the same, and in her blackest mood to avenge the insult. All she did, it seemed a small thing, was to toss down on the table a golden apple. Then she breathed upon the guest once and vanished. The apple lay gleaming among the piled fruits and the brimming wine cups, and bending close to look at it, everyone could see the words, "To the fairest," traced on its side. Then the three greatest of the goddesses each claimed that it was hers. Hera claimed it as the wife to Zeus, the All Father, the queen of all the gods. Athena claimed that she had the better right, for the beauty of wisdom such as hers surpassed all else. Aphrodite only smiled and asked who had a better claim to the beauty's prize than the goddess of beauty herself. They fell to arguing among themselves. The argument between became a quarrel, and the quarrel grew more and more and more bitter, and each called upon the assembled guests to judge between them. But the other guests refused, for they knew well enough that whichever goddess they chose to receive the golden apple, they would make enemies of the other two. In the end, the three took the quarrel home with them to Olympus. The other gods took sides, some with one and some with another, and the ill will between them dragged on for a long while, more than long enough in the world of men for a child born when the quarrel first began to grow to manhood and became a warrior or a herdsman. But the immortal gods did not know time as mortals know it. Now, on the northeast coast of the Aegean Sea, there was a city of men. Troy was its name, a great city surrounded by strong walls and standing on the hill hard by the shore. It had grown rich on the tolls of the king demanded from the merchant ships passing upon the nearby straits to the Black Sea, cornlands, and down again. Priam, who was now king, was lord of a wide realms and long maned horses, and he had many sons about the hearth. And when the quarrel began about the golden apple was still raw and new, a last son was born to him, and his wife Queen Hecuba, and they called him Paris. They should have been great rejoicing, but when Hecuba still carried the babe within her, the soothsayers had foretold that she would give birth to a firebrand, and that should burn down the city of Troy. And so, when he was born and named, the king bade a servant carry him out into the wilderness and leave him to die. The servant did as he was bid, but a herdsman searching for a missing calf found the babe and brought him up as his own. The boy grew tall and strong and beautiful, the swiftest runner and the best archer in all the country round. So his boyhood passed among the oak woods and the high hill pastures that rose toward Mount Ida, and there he met and fell in love, all with a wood nymph called Anon, who loved him in return. She had the gift of being able to heal, and the wounds of mortal men, no matter how sorely they were hurt. We are on the top of page 4. Among the oak woods they lived together and were happy
until one day the three jealous goddesses, still quarreling about the golden apple, chanced to look down from Olympus and saw the beautiful young man herding his cattle on the slopes of Mount Ida. They knew, for the gods know all things, that he was the son of Priam, king of Troy, though he himself did not know it yet. But the thought came to them that he would not know who they were, and therefore he would not be afraid to judge between them. They were growing somewhat weary of the argument by then. So they tossed the apple down to him, and Paris put it on his hands and caught it. After the three came down, landing before him so lightly that their feet did not bend the mountain grasses, and bade him choose between them which was the fairest and had the right to the prize he held in his hand. First, Athena, in her gleaming armor, fixed him with sword gray eyes and promised him supreme wisdom if he would name her. Then Hera, in her royal robes, as queen of heaven, promised him vast wealth and power and honor if he awarded her the prize. Lastly, Aphrodite drew near, her eyes as blue as deep sea water, her hair like spun gold wreathed around her head, and smiling honey sweet, whispered that she would give him a wife as fair as herself if he tossed the apple to her. And Paris forgot the other two with their offers of wisdom and power, forgot also at the moment the dark-haired unknown in the shadowed oak woods, and he gave the golden apple to Aphrodite. Then Athena and Hera were angry with him for refusing them the prize, just as the wedding guest had known that they would be, and both of them were angry with Aphrodite. But Aphrodite was well content and set about keeping her promise to her herdsman, who was a king's son. She put a certain thought into the heads of some of King Priam's men, so that they came cattle raiding at the full of the moon and drove off Paris's big, beautiful herd bull, who was lord of all his cattle. Then Paris left the hills and came down into Troy, seeking his bull. And there Hecuba, his mother, chanced to see him, and knew by his likeness to his brothers and by something in her own heart that he was the son she had thought dead and lost to her in his babyhood. She wept for joy and brought him before the king, and seeing him living and so good to look upon, all men forgot the prophecy, and Priam welcomed him into the family and gave him a house of his own like each of the other Trojan princes. There he lived whenever he would, but at other times he would be away, back to the oak woods, to Mount Ida, to his love unknown. And so things went on happily enough for a while. But meantime, across the Aegean Sea, another wedding had taken place, the marriage of King Menelaus of Sparta to the Princess Helen, whom men called Helen of the Fair Cheeks, the most beautiful of all mortal women. Her beauty was famous throughout the kingdom of Greece, and many kings and princes had wished to marry her, among them Odysseus, whose kingdom was the rocky island of Ithaca. Her father would have none of them, but he gave her to Menelaus. Yet, because he feared trouble between her suitors at a later time, he caused all them to swear that they would stand with her husband for her sake if ever he had need of them. And between Helen and Odysseus, who married her cousin Penelope and loved her as well, there was a lasting friendship that stood her in good stead when she had sore need of a friend years afterward. Even beyond the farthest bounds of Greece, the fame of Helen's beauty traveled until it came at last to Troy, as Aphrodite had known it would. And Paris no sooner heard of her beauty than he determined to go and see for himself if she was indeed as fair as men said. Anon wept and begged him to stay with her, but he paid no heed, and his feet came no more upon the track to her woodland cave. If Paris wanted a thing, then he must have it. So he begged a ship from his father, and he and his companions set out. All the length of the Aegean Sea was before them, and the winds blew them often from their true course. But they came at last to the landfall, and ran their ships on the beach, and climbed the long hill track that brought them to the fortress palace of King Menelaus. Slaves met them, as they met all strangers, in the outer court, and led them to wash off the salt and dust of their long journey. And presently, clad fresh clothes, they were standing before the king in his great hall, when the fire burned on the raised hearth in the center, and the king's favorite hounds lay sprawled about his feet. "Welcome to you, strangers," said Menelaus. "Tell me who you are, and where you come from, and what brings you to my hall." "Well, I am a king's son, Paris by name, from Troy, far across the sea," Paris told him, "and I come because the wish is on me to see distant places, and the fame of Menelaus has reached our shores as a great king and a generous host to strangers." "Well, sit and eat, for you must be way weary of such traveling," said the king. And when they were seated, meat and fruit and wine and golden cups were brought in and set before them. And while they ate and talked with their hosts, telling the adventures of their journey, Helen the queen came in from the women's quarters, 2 of her maidens following, one carrying her baby daughter, one carrying her ivory spindle and distaff laden with wool of the deepest violet color. And she sat down on the far side of the fire, the women's side, and began to spin. And as she spun, she listened to the stranger's tales of his journeying, and in a little snatched glances with their eyes went to each other through the fondling hearth smoke. And Paris saw Menelaus' queen was fair even than the stories told, golden as cornstalk and sweet as wild honey. And Helen saw above all things that the stranger prince was young. Menelaus had been her father's choice, not hers, and though their marriage was happy enough, he was much older than she was, with the first gray hairs already in his beard. There was no gray in the gold of Paris's beard, and his eyes were bright, and there was laughter at the corners of his mouth. Her heart quickened, and she looked at him, and once, still spinning, she snapped the violet thread. For many days Paris and his companions remained as guests as King Menelaus, and soon it was not enough for Paris to look at the queen. Poor Oenon was quite forgotten, and he did not know how to go away, leaving Helen of the fair cheeks behind. So the days went by, and the prince and the queen walked together through the cool olive gardens and under the white-flowered almond trees of the palace. And he sat at her feet while she spun her violet wool and sang her songs of his own people. And then one day the king rode out hunting, and Paris made an excuse not to ride with him, and he and his companions remained behind. And when they were alone together, walking in the silvery shade of the olives, while his companions and her maidens amused themselves at a little distance, Paris told the queen that it was for sight of her that he had come so far, and that now that he had seen her, he loved her to his heart's core and could not live without her. "You should not have told me this," said Helen, "for I am another man's wife, and because you have told me it will be worse for me when you go away and must leave me behind." "Honey, sweet," said Paris, "my ship is in the bay. Come with me now, while the king, your husband, is away from home, for we belong to each other, you and I, like 2 slips of a vine sprung from the same stalk." And they talked together on and on through the hot noontide, with the crickets chirring, he urging and she holding back. But he was Paris, who always got the things he wanted, and deep within her heart, she wanted the same thing. And in the end, she left her lord, her babe, and her honor, and followed by his companions with the maidens wailing and pleading behind, he led her down the mountain paths and through the passes to his ships waiting on the seashore. So Paris had the bride that Aphrodite had promised him, and from that came all the sorrows that followed.